professor in my career, and I could speak off the top of my head on the topics that I studied for decades, but make a commentary on topic issues such as this doesn't come easy. So for a stammer and stutter, please understand, I'm not in that line of business. So, starting actually with pages in my presentation missing, so let me organize those. So Senator Jackson, welcome to our center, and welcome to our community, welcome to your constituents. I think I'll be joined by the others to say that we're honored that you came here. We're honored and we're delighted that you responded to our situation. We agreed to meet you here so you can hear directly from us where that strong letter we wrote you originates. But we also want you to understand we're not completely oblivious to where you're coming from either. You listened to a story, as Dr. Eba just said, a well-rehearsed story, a well-crafted story that has been tested and retested since the 1980s. About the people in a faraway Ethiopia that are going through unthinkable suffering. You, a woman of God, a woman with a good heart, you told yourself you have to do something. I guess that is also why you run for public office, so you can offer help to the least among us. For that, I have nothing but commendation for you. But Senator, one who has a platform such as yours, one who speaks and acts on behalf of thousands, constituents, also has a duty to always ask the following questions. Do I know all the facts? Could I do harm to others if I act on partial information or wrong information? To all of us here, it's obvious that you were misled. You were taken by a scheme, again, that has existed continuously since the TPLF went to the bush to start organizing global partners, global supporters. And this community is deeply hurt as a result. The challenge my colleagues and I have this evening is to provide you with a more complete set of information. It is our hope, with that in hand, with the full knowledge, my paper is going all over the place. I told you I'm not a great public speaker, so this is everything. Doing good. Yeah, this thing is sliding everywhere. That's all right. I've gone through that page. Thank you. Thank you. So, my challenge and the challenge of Dr. Eba and our colleague will follow is to provide you with a more complete scene, a complete set of information. It is our hope, with that in hand, with full knowledge, you will do what needs to be done to repair the damage and lighten the heavy hearts in our community. Let me begin with the sinister story often told about the start of the war. There are many versions of it. In SR 800, it appeared in the following ways. On November 4th, 2020, an elected Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, declared war on Tigray. That might sound to some, this is just reading the calendar, the note on the calendar. It actually, in reality, it is a sinister framing that is not only factually inaccurate, but is first step of creating a false image of an omnivore that destroys everything in its path. And I'll explain that in a minute. But first, the facts. The first shot in the war was fired by TPLF's special forces and TPLF aligned officers in the Ethiopian National Defense Forces. The target was the Northern Command of the Ethiopian Defense Forces. For more than 20 years, the Northern Command was camped in Tigray, defending the north of the country, primarily from Eritrea. The Northern Command had the best units, the most advanced equipment, the best training. It also had one other distinction. The senior commanders were nearly all ethnic Tigrayans. And Tigrayans were nearly half of the enlisted troops and junior officers. Once it became clear that the new Prime Minister is not a malleable toy they can do what they wish with, they started working on a plan, rehearsed it, and executed it on November 3rd. It began with the invitation of nearly 1,000 senior officers to dinner at Makale, the state capital. When they showed up, non-Tigrayans, one by one, were detained. Some resisted, and those who resisted were shot. The others were arrested, and eventually those too were killed. A few hours later, soldiers and officers who were left in their bases were surrounded and killed while in bed. Most died, but a few escaped and lived to tell their story to the rest of us. Video 2, please. This is a short video clip. Unfortunately, it is in Amharic.
የሰሜን እዝን ከተባበሩት እጃችንን አናነሳም ካሉት የእዙ አባላት ጋር በመተባበርና ሊተባበሩ ፈቃደኛ ያልሆኑትን ደግሞ በኃይል ተልኳቸው እንዳይወጡ ዲሞቢላይዝ ወይም ደግሞ ዲስቴብላይዝ በማድረግ የተደረገ እንቅስቃሴ ነው። በጣም ፈጣን የሆነ እርምጃ ነው የተወሰደው። በኦልሞስት በ45 ደቂቃ ውስጥ እዙን በሙሉ ለመቆጣጠር የተቻለበት ነው። አንዳንድ ፖኬቶች ላይ ከቀሩት ውጪ ፈጣን የሆነ መብረቃዊ የሚባል ጥቃት በማድረስ ወራሪውን ኃይል በማዛባት በማተራመስ ራሳቸውን ከጥቃት የሚያድኑበት መብረቃዊ የሆነ እርምጃ መወሰድ ነበረበት። ያ መብረቃዊ እርምጃ ባይወሰድ ኖሮ ይሄን ጊዜ ትግራይ አሁን ቁጭ
This man, his name is Sekuturi Getachew. He is the chief propagandist for the TPLF, and he actually chose to speak in my language, not his, because he was bragging about how successful they were in eliminating all resistance in 45 minutes, he says. The fact is, it took a little bit longer than that, but it wasn't too far from the truth. The government has yet to release official count of the casualties of that day and night. But an African-American freelance journalist by the name of Jamal Countess has been reporting from Ethiopia for the last year. And he says in one of his reports that his sources told him 9,000 servicemen and women were killed by their brothers in arms. Think about that number for a minute. 9,000. For a nation that's a third of the United States. In American terms, there will be 27,000 Americans killed by a treasonous act. What is the country to do? What should it do? What did the United States do when 3,000 of our fellow citizens were killed on September 11? You all know the answer. Everybody here is old enough to remember that. What did the United States do when Fort Sumter was attacked? Now, nobody here is old enough to remember that, not even me. For the uninitiated, Fort Sumter is the place where the first shot was fired in the Civil War. And interestingly enough, you know how many people died in that incursion? One Union soldier died. What did the United States do? Started the Civil War. The Civil War, the war where America lost the most people in a single war. More than the Second World War, more than Vietnam. The one war where more Americans died than any other time. But that was the war to keep the country as one. That was to reverse and punish treason. So, what did Ethiopia have to do? Yes, it did not start the war, but also it had no choice but to join it. It launched a law enforcement campaign, but against a even more heavily armed terrorist gang than the government army itself. And one other thing. Today, there is no war in Tigray. Just think about that. All of this stuff you see, there's no war in Tigray, but there's war in Ethiopia. There's war in Afar. I'm sorry. And there's war in Amman. The other element embedded in that same first line, the preamble, also spoke of the war being declared by unelected Prime Minister Abiy. In preparing for this, I read the October 6, 2018 edition of the Ethiopian Reporter. It's an English language newspaper printed in Addis weekly. It gave the following account of the election that brought us, let me call it the event that brought us Abiy Ahmed for the first time. In March of that year, the EPRDF Council was convened to elect a new party chair and to nominate a prime minister who could replace the one who had just resigned in February. The system for installing the prime minister was the very one the TPLF designed, perfected, and used for 27 years. 180 council members coming from the four ethnic parties that make up the TPLF, each sent 45 delegates. According to the reporter, the vote tally was as follows. First, the candidates were Abiy Ahmed and Mኾኑn. And the tally was 176 to 1 Abiy Ahmed. Apparently 3 of those council people didn't show up or didn't vote, abstained. A few days later, the Prime Minister nominee was approved by a parliament where the ruling party had 100% of the seats. Any Ethiopian who is here remembers that laughter Susan Rice gave us ridiculing our country. But she was actually saying that is a democratic expression, that they had just a democratic election. So a non-TPLF member became Prime Minister for the second time, but this did not upset them. Their experience with the immediate past Prime Minister had assured them that they could control everything that really matters without sitting at the Prime Minister's desk. It was an election conducted in a rigged system, but Abiy Ahmed was elected under that system, no different from any of his predecessors. Even better, in June 2021, Ethiopia had a national election actually. That was not perfect either, I'll tell you on the front end, but it was among the best in that country's history. Abiy's Prosperity Party won overwhelmingly. The party re-elected Abiy to serve as Prime Minister. So I would say this, Prime Minister Abiy is as legitimate the Prime Minister of Ethiopia as President Joe Biden is a legitimate President of the United States. This idea of the unelected Prime Minister is not really to call him unelected. It is nothing but a disingenuous attempt at creating a boogeyman, as a stand-in for an imaginary evil nation. Think of Iraq. For almost 20 years before the war, we never heard of Iraq. We heard of Saddam Hussein. And think of Libya. For almost 40 years, we never heard of Libya. It's Muammar Gaddafi all the time. And in the eyes of the TPLF, official Washington, and even our own Georgia now, as well as the media, Ethiopia is an elected Prime Minister Abiy. What a sad story. The other falsehood that is often told is the story of Ethiopia weaponizing hunger. And I'll address that next. While summarizing the similarity of the conflict-driven famine of the 1980s with the present-day conditions addressed in the resolution, you, Senator, and your colleagues spoke of history repeating itself. And actually, I agree with you, right there. History is repeating itself. And I am of that certain age. And I not only remember the images, I remember the war. And not from newspapers, I lived through it. I wasn't a soldier, but I lived in Ethiopia then. I came here in 85. During the famine of the 1980s, the TPLF forced Tigrayans to stay away from feeding stations in eastern and southern Tigray. Instead, it forced hungry people, to march thousands of kilometers to the Sudanese border. When they arrived, those that survived the march were used as props to facilitate a scheme of converting food aid into weapons. In 2010, the CIA finally declassified its reports on the period, and soon the BBC, the Telegraph, Deutsche Welle, the Guardian, and others confirmed that hundreds of millions of Ethiopian famine aid was traded for weapons by the TPLF. Here is Dr. Alemayehu, the founder and commander of the TPLF, reporting during that famine, explaining the scheme.
Senator, first, thank you very much for coming. it's not easy to face after what is spoke. I'm not sure what topic or point I should say, but let me generalize it. I was born and raised in Tigray. I'm an Ethiopian, also an American. TPLF doesn't represent Tigray nor Tigrayan people. TPLF elite by itself controlled the Ethiopian federal government for 27 years. Now, imagine after 27 years, they go back and again started the November 4 awful war. Prior to that, 4 months earlier than the war, we Tigrayan people, Tigray Democratic Party, officially we had a publication that says no more war, because they invited us to go against Abiy Ahmed, finish him, and then go back to Eritrea, finish Isaias Afwerki. We said no more war. Then they declared they started the war. The other thing is, if the federal government, Abiy Ahmed, paused the war, withdraw from Tigray, what did they do? By Getachew Reda, TPLF speaker, they moved to Amhara and to Afar. Only in Afar, one area, if I'm not mistaken, 198 women and children were killed by TPLF. So what I'm saying, if I could attention to you, is whatever they said, those young kids, the story might be true, but it is by TPLF. The other point, let me finish, the other point is the federal government is not targeting Tigray or Tigrayans. For that matter, in the federal government, the health department minister, Dr. Leah Tadesse, is from Tigray. The military commander, for that matter, Minister Dr. Abraham, is from Tigray. The Ethiopian Airlines CEO is from Tigray. He might be retired. The economic advisor to Dr. Abiy Ahmed Arkebe is from Tigray. I'm not sure if he's not in power right now. There is no targeting Tigray or Tigrayan people. If that was the case, I wouldn't even come here. Let me finalize. This community never supported war, never raised money for the war. If you go one block next to Chick-fil-A, the Tigrayan community, not all of them, most of them, those young kids, they raised money, TPLF, to keep going the war. Thank you.
Thank you, Tadessa. So going back to history repeating itself, and what is going on now that's comparable to the 80s. Today, TPLF is blocking aid from getting to the people of Tigray for the very same reasons, using almost the same methods. When the Ethiopian government and the international community finally agreed and began delivering food to Tigray, the trucks will never return. After thousands of trucks disappeared, it became obvious, and they started showing up actually in the fronts, carrying soldiers, carrying supplies. It became obvious to all that the TPLF was using them as logistics for its war effort. It was also using for one other thing. Once they got into the interior, into the more developed part, in Desi, in Waldia, the Ethiopians here know the story. They had thousands of mechanics with those trucks to disassemble everything that's bolted to the ground and move it to the ground. Not just ransack warehouses and hospitals and clinics and labs, university offices, but to take away private property to their home base. In just one instance, my phone is ringing. Why? I told you not to. In just one instance, 468 trucks went in, and only 26 returned. So, as in the 80s, TPLF's number one priority was the war effort, not the lives of Tigrayans. When the firefight broke recently over the control of a strategic mountain pass near Abala in Afar, and when that conflict blocked food convoy, the elders in the area, international diplomats, pleaded with TPLF to back away a little bit so the convoy could pass. It decided controlling that point, the high point, is more important than food getting to Tigray. For nearly a year, the TPLF blocked the hungry people from leaving Tigray and crossing over to Amhara, until just a couple of weeks ago. The hungry people of Tigray found, some of them anyway, a gap in, what do you call that cage in Texas where they put the cows? Barn, found a gap in the barn, and several thousand, I think about 12,000 crossed over, but they quickly cut it off. Why? Because the interest is not feeding the people of Tigray. So yes, history is indeed repeating itself. TPLF is a beast that does not change its colors. And finally, I want to address the charge of genocide, often repeated in that production. Senator, we have an ugly war. Both sides inflicting massive casualties on the other. But incidents of mass civilian casualties only happen on the territories that were occupied by the TPLF. We'll find one incident of civilian casualties or mass grave in Tigray, not one, but you can find dozens in Amhara. At least one that Tadessa mentioned, where over 200 school children and their mothers were killed in a school. And official utterances which mimic incitement to genocide also come from the TPLF side. I want you to take a look. This one is part English, part Amharic, part Tigrinya. An angry guy trying to encourage people to engage in genocide.
ኢትዮጵያን ገለተልኩም ሰላም ከይትሉ ብስሩ ከይተዛርቡ ኣብ ስቶር ዲዮ ኣብ ሱፐርማርኬት ኣብ ሞል ክትረኽቦ ትኽእሉ በቃ መሕዝነት ገለ እንተሃልዩ ብሓደ ትበልዑ ትሰቱ እንተነርኩም ደወብሉ ሓዳር ተሃልይዋ ምሳኻ ወይ እንተሃልይዎ ምሳኺ ወይ ወሊድኩም እንድሕር ኮይንኩም ኣባርዎ ካብ ገዛኹም በታ ትኽወት ዘለኩም ኣብነት ኢትዮጵያዊ ኮይኑ ወይ ዝኾነ ኣምሓራ ዲ ገለ that person doesn't qualify to be your friend they don't qualify to be your friend. Avoid them. Unfriend go. Disengage them. Aitazarwo. Avoid these people. Engage them, unfriend them, unfollow them, unsubscribe from their any zalom YouTube dig zagalgala. Mangadi ayer Ethiopia khamtu zahanasnayo. Bu matan tu'awa khabil كنسرح نكلله من قد هاي إثيوبيا وردت مخانو شكانة سمولو تكال مخانو صارت تكال مخانو نمول عالم كنا فلتين إثيوبيا هاي من قد أليانس ستار أليانس جروبس بحاله ستار أليانس ممبرشيب ريفوك جبر من قد هاي إثيوبيا شو خفوا خو ندور القرامة إثيوبيا هاي من قد كيتكم إتحاد كيتكم إرتراين حواتنا بسنة كالو سلو من قد هاي إثيوبيا كيتكم حالو تلو تركي تتقوم كات بهالنجار راجفنا لنا تعالي عود سيو باي ذا واي نايز أرسزي إثيوبيا باي باي درزي ciao.
An angry man who is instructing his fellow Tigrayans not to come across any other Ethiopian. No, any Ethiopian. Because a Tigrayan in his mind is not an Ethiopian. He said if you have a wife who is not Tigrayan, kick her out of the house. And the children as well. Those who study such things tell us this is the language used to incite genocide. In Bosnia, in Rwanda, and in the Congo, the genocidaires, that's how they incite people to rise against their fellow countrymen. During the TPLF's occupation of Tsehai, one of the northern Amara towns, word came that people actually acted on this instruction. A man kicked his wife and children. Another man killed his wife and his impure children, his own children. A woman who was married to a soldier, was living in the south of the country, surrendered her child to the streets and said, I can't live with an impure child, and went back north. A mother. Think about that. But the TPLF propaganda operations are always meticulously planned and executed. Just 2 days after the war broke, the cyber warfare unit of the TPLF began trying out different hashtags to influence the narrative of the conflict. You can see what they were testing from the image that I have here. Maybe. This is actually December 16th, but the December 16th of 2020, the first sighting of hashtag Tigray Genocide happened on November 6th. But I couldn't locate it. I'm not good enough with the internet to find it. Am I going too long? So sorry. But I'm about done actually, I'm done. So, they tried out all of those and settled on Tigray Genocide. And to a lot of people, that is not just a hashtag, that is now the entire story of the Ethiopian conflict. What constitutes genocide is defined by an international convention. I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think it includes refusing to feed enemy soldiers engaged in combat against you. I don't think it includes refusing to provide logistics to facilitate the enemy's war effort either. And I don't think it includes refusing to set up a communications network for a terrorist gang constitutes genocide. Senator, these are the most egregious points raised in the resolution. None of them are based on truth, and all of them are highly damaging to the prospect for peace. What is clear, at least to me, is that you were told a lot of heart-wrenching stories by your interns in official Washington. This afternoon, I tried my level best, I think it's still afternoon, to let you see the whole truth about the specific issues raised in the resolution. I refrained from raising counter-charges about the other side. Yes, people are hungry in Tigray, but also they are hungry in large swaths of Amara, Afar lands, which were ransacked by the TPLF or are still occupied. Yes, TPLF's refusal to disarm and to withdraw from Amara and Afar territories has rendered security in Tigray, Amara and Afar to be impossible. But no, neither the Amara people, the Afar people, or the Ethiopian government is using starvation as a weapon of war. And no, there are no mass graves in Tigray. Such things can also be found in Amara and Afar, where the TPLF soldiers are. This is the truth. Such truths beg to be acknowledged. They deserve to be acknowledged. To gloss over the truth is hurtful to our community and dims the prospect of peace in Ethiopia. I thank you all.